What is the actual solution? Because we're about to get into the method of solving this and how we get there. But like, what is the solution? Like,
thanks for asking the simple questions.
By the way, this chart that is incredible. Anyone who's listened to the show, we're about to walk through a chart which talks about energy use, energy generation. It's brilliant.
I think it's one of the most resourceful sites that anyone can dig into who is interested in data, not only regarding climate change, but also economic activity. I recommend that a lot. So what we can see here is that...
Yeah, try to explain how this chart looks to somebody who's listening. We will put it in the show notes. But
so it's essentially a pie chart that describes in detail per industry what the industry's contribution, the sector's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is. And it pies it out in a way that sort of in the highest aggregation form, we only have a couple of big industries left which contribute to essentially 100% of GHG emissions. And what we can see is that the energy sector, directly or indirectly, contributes about 75%, give or take, to the CO2 emissions. And I think that's important. If you ask me, what is the solution? We need to understand energy. We need to understand energy generation, energy distribution and energy consumption, and where the majority of the energy is actually consumed.
So just a quick question. I'll explain to the people who are listening. So the pie chart essentially says energy is 73.2%, agriculture, forestry and land use is 18.4%, waste is 3.2%, and then industry is 5.2%. And then in each one of those, when you go and check out the chart, it breaks it down further. Mm-hmm. But where we have industry as cement and chemicals as 3% and 2.2% separately, but within energy use we have iron and steel at 7.2%. Why is cement and chemicals not? Is that a byproduct of the manufacture?
I cannot answer that question. I think there are some conscious choices around how this gets displayed. Because you're absolutely right. I mean,
but it could be that the production of cement leads to a CO2 emissions. Whereas iron and steel, it's the use of the energy.
It's indirect, yes.
Yeah, it's indirect and indirect. So it could be that. I'd like to know that. Okay. And then, so when I see iron and steel is 7.2% total, that is in using the energy that industry uses. So if you electrify that part, if the energy generation came from renewables, for all of that could be zero. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting.
Directly zero, but indirectly, of course, you would have an effect. Yes.
And I would look at something like aviation at 1.9% and say, well, we can't do anything about that because we're not going to, like Boeing are not going to produce.
We cannot do anything structural about it because people want to move and people will want to move. And there is no way that in the short term we can substitute the fuel to synthetic fuels in a way that it would help the climate cause. But I think it's actually an interesting item you're pointing towards, because we get a lot hung up on these these really nice examples of shaming airlines.
Yeah, we shame airlines and it's 2%, and we shame Bitcoin mining. I wonder where Bitcoin would be on this chart. It would be like
I think this is exactly the conversation that we need to have.
So one more question before we start breaking it down. So when I see deforestation as 2.2%, but that isn't an increase, that isn't the carbon going into the atmosphere. That's the
opportunity cost.
Yes, the opportunity cost by having a reduced absorption of
carbon sequestration.
Okay. Yeah, this chart's fucking brilliant. Yeah. Honestly, if you're listening, whatever your beliefs are, go and check this chart out. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think this is, once you see it from that aggregated level, you also understand that if you ask me now, where are the different intervention points where Bitcoin could make sense, it becomes pretty clear. So we need to distinguish two things here. There's energy that gets produced and generated, which never sees a grid, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, these large steel mills, they usually have direct purchasing agreements, long-term direct purchasing agreements with for their baseline with a reliable energy supplier, but they also purchase energy from the grid.
Well, what my question is very simple.
Yeah.
If we want to reduce the burning, or if we want to reduce the amount of increase in carbon in the atmosphere, what are the quick wins here? So you look at something like transport, 16.2%. If we move to an electrified fleet of vehicles globally, that means that is a number we can erode.
Yes, if you are sure that the electrification or the energy actually comes from a renewable source, which is not that easy.
Yeah.
And I think this is exactly where we have to have a more nuanced conversation, because what we now know is where this conversation starts from is we know that the majority of the grid is still considered fossil, so carbon intensive.
Okay.
There's a growing minority of the grid that is renewable. The problem here is that this is a complex interaction between the energy generators, the grid operators, and the consumers. Okay, so it's not that easy to just say, and you've covered that. We don't have to go into this in detail, right? I mean, Jean Cornell talked about that very eloquently. There is a lever here where we say, how can we start to decarbonize the energy sector by slowly, emphasis on slowly, substituting fossil fuel related energy sources with renewable energy sources. Why does this make economic sense? Because the price curve for the renewables is massively decreasing, while obviously the marginal cost for fossil fuel is going up because it gets harder and harder to produce it. Now we are in a very special circumstance at the moment, which is not reflective for neither the past nor hopefully the long-term future.
Just a quick question.
Go.
What's the role of nuclear in this for you?
Personally, I think nuclear needs to be a part of the equation.
Agreed.
If you look at how efficiently we use energy, we've moved from, a little bit of dry grass to wood, to coal, to uranium. Yeah. So it's
to fission.
Maybe to fission in the future.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah. But I think when we talk about baseload, so an ensured reliable baseload supply, nuclear needs to be part of the equation. It's from a climate perspective, it's clean.
Cleanish.
Cleanish, yes. Yes, you have a long-term problem of storage.
We found out the other day that the big tanks of green goo is a myth. I was kind of disappointed.
What is green goo?
Like in The Simpsons, at the nuclear plant, they have the big tanks of green goo that leaks into the river and creates a three-eyed fish. There's no
shit.
There's no green goo.
Okay. I'm super relieved to hear that.
Yeah, I might sound like a moron, and I hope I get backed up by here, but I imagine there was some kind of goo. Did you?
I mean, I didn't expect it to be like The Simpsons, but I didn't know what it looked like.
Did you expect it to be a goo, though?
I don't think so, is the truth. I expected like rods.
Shut up. You're just saying that to make me look stupid.
Yeah.
See, that's why he's the natural successor.
Good.
Fuck you, Danny. All right.
And I think once we start to understand that it's not that simple to stabilize grids through simple scaling of renewable energies, we start to have a better conversation about what it really takes to accomplish that. For instance, we know that there is a massive amount of projects that have been developed, specifically in the UK, by the way, through government subsidies for solar and wind.
And to anyone who says, yes, but it's government subsidies, let's just be real. The fossil fuel industry is highly subsidized.
Yeah, 6 trillion.
So come on.
So this is not a free market. It's a highly corrupted market for various reasons. And so what happens now is if you have these projects which essentially could generate a lot of energy, we're talking gigawatts here, and gigawatt hours here, this cannot be dispatched to the grid. And why is that? Because the grid operator says, with this additional supply, we cannot balance our grid proportionally or appropriately because we do not know how we can dispatch it to a demand. Yeah. And so they say, well, either our so what we need to do now is to widen our bandwidth. So we need more bandwidth on the grid. Well, the question is, who is going to pay for that? Now the grid operator says, I'm not going to pay for that, but the regulator says you have to do that. And then the grid operator says, if I have to do it, then I will cascade the cost down to the end consumer. So we see this is a very, very complex relationships and the political game of who is carrying the water in the very end. And on top of that, you have now someone needs to have these projects in the 100 millions on their books. Now these are very costly projects that still have a maintenance cost but don't return you anything.
But if we look at where it has happened, parts of Scandinavia have been very successful moving to renewables. Even Germany was fairly successful in transitioning to some renewable.
Germany was the pioneer of all of this.
Yes,
yeah.
But they decommissioned their nuclear plants and became reliant on Russian natural gas, which is a separate issue.
Yeah.
But and also Texas isn't Texas like 70%? Oh, I
think wrong. It's had days over 70%.
Days over.
Yes.
But like Texas as an oil and gas, it's oil and gas country over there, boy, and they have successfully been transitioning over time to renewables.
Yes. Because the business case makes sense.
Yes.
Now you ask me, what are the solutions? Okay.
Yeah.
What is the natural price of energy if you produce it or generate it? Nothing. It's zero. So you need a customer to pay something for it. Now, what you're looking for is buyers of first resort. Who is willing to buy that energy under all circumstances? There are not many.
The government isn't?
Well, what do you do with this energy? You need to understand about energy. You cannot just discard it. Energy cannot be destroyed. So once you produce the energy, it needs to be actively managed out if nobody uses it. Do you want to hear a cool example on that?
Tell me.
So in Austria, the main energy supplier has a framework agreement with the Austrian railways, so that if they have too much supply running on their grid, the Austrian railways is running their locomotives empty, just to kill the energy, just to destroy the energy.
Oh yeah, this is like running the toasters, right?
It's like running the toaster, but the locomotive takes a bit more energy, so this is really good. So once you understand that, you can ask who is the buyer and who pays here. Who pays here? The energy provider pays. Okay, so it's negatively priced energy.
So they might as well spend that on some ASICs. And
what if you only would have a solution that would buy this energy either for free or for a symbolic 1 cent? You already would be in a better situation than if you were just, always troubled by how to curtail and how to kill this energy.
Okay, so listen, we've covered this on the show a lot. Yeah. Bitcoin miners will buy that.
Bitcoin miners will buy that.
They will buy it, and if it is a low enough price, they will take that and they will turn that into money, and we will grow the Bitcoin network. Cool. We will increase security. We'll improve the money. We'll improve the world. We've covered this. So my question for you is like, everybody listening knows that they buy that. Great. Two things. Firstly, if every single grid was to attach Bitcoin miners to its network, firstly, are there enough ASICs available now? Is the network big enough to support all of them? I'm not sure it is. So Bitcoin itself needs to grow. Bitcoin needs to be a bigger network, and the market cap needs to be higher. So that's something. But that's fine, because we know this is a transitional period and it will take time. But how will that lead to more or an increase in the development of renewables? Why does Bitcoin incentivize that? All Bitcoin does is incentivize the buying of energy. But they could buy that off a coal plant. They could buy that off a nuclear plant. They could buy the excess energy from anyone.
And they will.
And they will. So what is this connection here to renewables?
Because if you take the whole subsidy game out of play.
Okay, free market. Full free market.
Then if you look at the marginal cost of a kilowatt hour produced by fossil fuel, it's going to be way higher.
The marginal cost.
Yes.
Because it's
zero.
The renewable. It's close to zero on wind and solar.
Yeah, and I mean, you need to dig deeper to get the oil actually out of the earth. Yeah. So you need to get it first out. You need to transport it. You need to refine it. You need to transport that again. That all builds cost into the kilowatt hour or the energy that you can get out of it. So there is a natural incentive by simple economics to switch to renewables. Now, yes, it's true, we have the problem of intermittence on the renewable side. But this is not something that we can not solve for. It's just an additional problem which can be solved either through...
Well, it is being solved.
Well, not really.
Well,
let's be realistic.
No, on a 100% grid, no. But the energy sector, like what was it? Nima we had in yesterday. Yeah. Nima we had in yesterday. We were talking about this with him. The energy network originally, like say the UK network, a few decades ago, would have been 10 coal power plants powering an entire country. And now what we have is a highly decentralized, complex network where energy can come from coal. It can come from me with solar panels on my roof. It's a stronger network in some ways because it's become decentralized.
Absolutely.
But in that, we still have a network which is flexible. We do still have that. So as we've become more decentralized, as we've had more renewables, the network is adapted to become more flexible, to deal with the intermittency. So it is being solved partially. Maybe are you telling me, or you disagree with me, or are you saying it's not solved to the point where we could have a 100% renewable network?
No, it's not solved to a point where we can provide through renewable sources the energy requirement that is needed to substitute fossil fuels. I don't know what the precise percentage is, but
we can produce enough energy from the sources. The intermittency is the issue.
Yes.
So is the...
But this is exactly why you need so much more flexible supply in order to have a grid that is stabilized with the bandwidth.
So you need to overproduce.
Exactly, of course.
And is overproduction enough? Or will you still have an intermittency? I was about to say intimacy issue. Can you... Is there or will you still have that? Because it sounds to me is like what we need is a balance of nuclear renewables.
Yes.
And some
Case
batteries.
closed.
And by the way,
not only, I think this is something you mentioned. Germany. I think Germany is a really interesting case because they've coined this term of power to X. Okay, so the idea of temporarily storing power or excess power in other forms is not new. You can do a lot of things. Power to X could be power to mining, could be power to gas, could be power to oil. Yeah, because essentially, if you have higher aggregated molecules, you can synthesize them as much as you can break them down. It's just chemically stored energy. Is it efficient? Not really, but it's a way of how you can actually store energy that doesn't find a demand, which can be dispatched later when you need it. And this is why batteries at scale are so important, but batteries at industrial scale are not there yet.
No, and it feels like one of those hard problems to solve that I don't be seeing solved soon. But that said, Nima said batteries are still being used.
Oh yeah, I mean, the whole idea of the German energy transition focusing also on electric vehicles was that you essentially have a mobile fleet of batteries that in aggregate is big enough to provide that balancing factor. It's quite interesting because so what you do there is we are used to very linear energy flows. Okay, there's a generation, there's a transmission, there's a consumption, but these the bidirectional loading capabilities, this is something very new. So essentially you could say, oh, here, dear Tesla driver, here is access of energy. Would you mind stopping for 30 minutes to take that off for me? You get a super good price. And at a later point, you could also get the reminder to say, look, I could really use your energy. Do you want to provide that back? And this is the price I pay you.